The night my husband changed the locks, it was raining so hard I could barely see the driveway from the street. I sat in my car with the engine running and stared at the front door of the house I had paid for, the house where I had cooked every dinner for 4 years, scrubbed every bathroom tile, and quietly convinced myself that love meant sacrifice. My bags were already on the lawn, not packed neatly, thrown. 3 black trash bags split at the seams, my clothes soaking through in the October downpour. The porch light was on, and through the living room window I could see the silhouette of my mother-in-law sitting in my armchair like she had already moved in. She probably had. My name is Serena. I was 29 years old that night, and I had exactly $214 in my personal checking account, a half tank of gas, and a college friend's couch I could sleep on if I called her before midnight. What I did not have was a plan, a backup, or any idea that by the following morning, everything in my life was about to change so completely and so permanently that I would eventually look back at that rain-soaked driveway and feel nothing but gratitude. But I am getting ahead of myself. I met my husband Daniel at 24, fresh out of a communications degree and working a marketing coordinator job that barely covered my rent. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming before you understand what it costs. He had big ideas, a wide smile, and a mother named Margaret who looked at me the first time we met and smiled with only her mouth. I noticed it then. I chose to explain it away. Over the next 4 years, I became very good at explaining things away. Daniel and I married when I was 25. I was the one with the stable income. He was the one with the vision, or so we called it. His startup, a logistics software company he built with 2 college friends, was always 18 months away from its breakthrough. In the meantime, I covered the mortgage on our house in Phoenix, the car payments, the utilities, the groceries. I took a second job doing freelance content strategy on evenings and weekends. I told myself I was investing in our future. What I was actually doing was funding a lifestyle I had no part in designing. Margaret moved to Phoenix 14 months after our wedding. Daniel framed it as temporary. His father had passed, and she needed family nearby. I understood that. What I did not understand, and what took me far too long to name, was that Margaret did not see her son's marriage as a partnership she needed to respect. She saw it as a competing claim on a resource she had always considered exclusively hers. Every opinion I had about our finances was reckless. Every boundary I tried to establish was coldness. Every conversation I had alone with my husband was a threat that needed to be neutralized. His sister Courtney was worse because she was subtler. She never said anything directly cruel. She operated in suggestions and implications. She would mention, at family dinners I cooked, that she had heard about a great therapist for women who struggled with control issues. She would tell Daniel, in my presence, that he seemed tired lately, and then look at me. She was 27 and had never worked a full year anywhere, and my mother-in-law funded her apartment across town and called it support while calling my 2 jobs proof that I was too ambitious to be a good wife. I documented all of it. That is the part I need you to understand, because it matters later. I started keeping a private journal on an encrypted app after year 2 of the marriage. Dates, quotes, incidents. I had screenshots of text messages, voice memos of conversations I recorded when instinct told me things were about to escalate. I do not know exactly when I realized I might need evidence one day. I only know that somewhere in my body I understood that I was in the middle of something that was going to require proof. The night Daniel threw me out, there had been no screaming fight, no dramatic ultimatum. He simply sat down across from me at the kitchen table after dinner and told me, in a calm, rehearsed voice, that things were not working and that it would be better for everyone if I found somewhere else to stay while we figured things out. Margaret was in the living room. I could hear her television. She had been there for dinner. She was still there. I asked him if he had already spoken to a lawyer. He looked briefly surprised, then smoothed his expression and said he just wanted space. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I went upstairs, and I locked the bedroom door. And I called my college friend Rachel, who had graduated law school 2 years before me and was now a family attorney in Scottsdale. I told her everything I had just been told. She told me not to sign anything, not to leave voluntarily if I could help it, and to document the night's events as thoroughly as possible. I did exactly that. I photographed the house, my belongings, the rooms, the layout. I saved everything to the cloud. By the time I came back downstairs an hour later, Daniel had changed the lock on the front door and left the new key on the kitchen counter with a note that said he would have a friend watch the house that week and that he hoped we could handle this with maturity. My bags were already on the porch. Margaret was standing in the doorway watching me load them into my car with the same expression she used when she watched me do anything in her son's house. Faint satisfaction, like a woman watching a problem solve itself. I did not cry in front of her. I drove to Rachel's apartment and I sat on her kitchen floor with a glass of water and I cried then, privately, for about 40 minutes. Then I washed my face and I asked her what we were going to do. The next morning, at 7:42, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered because I was already awake, already staring at the ceiling of Rachel's guest room, already running through the checklist of everything I would need to do in the next 30 days. The man on the phone introduced himself as William Hartley, an estate attorney based in Tucson. He told me he had been trying to reach me for 3 weeks through a previous address, and had finally located my current contact information through a secondary next-of-kin filing. He informed me, in a measured, professional voice, that my great-uncle Victor Calloway had passed away 6 weeks prior, at the age of 81, and that in his will, which had been filed without contest and was currently in the final stages of probate, he had left the entirety of his estate to me. I did not know my great-uncle Victor. My mother had mentioned him twice in my life, both times briefly. He was her father's brother, estranged from the family for decades over something no one ever fully explained. I knew he existed the way you know about furniture in a room you never enter. I had not thought about him in years. His estate was valued at $38 million. I sat up slowly in the guest bed and asked William Hartley to repeat the figure. He did. I asked him how long the finalization process would take. He said 3 to 4 weeks, barring any complications. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in the silence for a long time. Then I walked into Rachel's kitchen and told her what had just happened. She poured us both coffee and sat down and said, quietly and carefully, that this changed the legal landscape of my divorce significantly, and that I needed to not tell a single person until we had a strategy in place. I did not tell anyone. I moved into a furnished short-term rental apartment that week, and I went about the process of beginning a divorce as though I were a woman with $200 and a freelance income. I met with Rachel daily. I gathered every financial document I had access to: bank records, credit card statements, tax filings from the years of our marriage. What emerged from those documents over the following 2 weeks was something I had suspected but never fully investigated. Daniel's startup had been using lines of credit opened partially in my name. 3 of them. He had my signatures on documents I had signed years ago without reading carefully, during a period when I trusted him completely, and when Margaret had convinced me that involving myself in the business details was micromanaging. The total exposure on those accounts was substantial. He had been building his company on my financial identity, and he had been preparing to exit the marriage, while leaving me holding the liability. Rachel connected me with a forensic accountant named Theodore, who wore reading glasses on the end of his nose and spoke about financial fraud with the same quiet fury a doctor uses to explain a diagnosis that could have been caught earlier. He told me what we had, what it meant, and who would need to know about it. I recorded every conversation I had with Daniel during this period. He called frequently, always framing the calls as attempts to work things out, always circling back to questions about my financial situation, what I had access to, whether I had spoken to anyone about the credit lines. He was careful, but not careful enough. 3 weeks after William Hartley's call, the estate cleared probate. $38 million transferred into an account Rachel had helped me establish independently. I looked at the confirmation on my phone screen for a long time. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I did not feel triumphant or giddy or vindicated. I felt something quieter and more permanent. I felt the specific, solid sensation of a door closing behind me on a room I no longer needed to return to. The calls started the following morning. 91 of them, across 3 days. From Daniel, from Margaret, from Courtney, from Daniel's startup partners, from a number I eventually identified as Margaret's personal attorney. 91 missed calls. I watched the notifications stack up and I did not answer a single one. What happened next happened because of Courtney. She had always been the one to push past whatever line had been established, and this time was no different. She located my short-term rental through a mutual acquaintance, showed up unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, and knocked on my door with the brittle brightness of someone performing concern for an audience that wasn't there. I opened the door because I wanted to see what she would say. She told me that the family was worried about me. She told me that Daniel missed me and had made mistakes, but that the marriage was worth saving. She told me, smiling, that she had heard through someone who knew someone that I had come into some money, and that given the credit situation with the business, it would probably be in everyone's best interest to resolve things quietly and privately before lawyers made everything more complicated and public than it needed to be. I looked at her for a moment. Then I told her, calmly, that I appreciated her stopping by. She blinked. She had expected something else. Fear, or relief, or gratitude, or compliance. Not calm, not a woman who was already 3 weeks ahead of her. I closed the door. That afternoon, Rachel filed the divorce petition. Theodore submitted his preliminary findings to the Arizona Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. The FBI field office in Phoenix, which had apparently already been conducting a separate investigation into Daniel's startup partners for securities irregularities, received a referral. It moved quickly after that, in the way that things move quickly when the evidence is already organized and the cooperation is already secured. Daniel was arrested on a Tuesday. I was not there for it. I was in a meeting with an architect at the time, reviewing plans for a building I had just purchased in downtown Phoenix. I heard about it through Rachel, who called me between the time he was taken into custody and the time his attorney arrived. She described the conversation she'd had with the prosecutor's office in the efficient, measured way she described most things. And then she paused and asked how I was feeling. I told her I felt fine. I meant it. The divorce proceedings concluded faster than either of us anticipated, largely because Daniel's attorney had limited leverage once the financial fraud investigation was underway, and largely because the credit lines opened in my name were now documented, dated, and assigned. The settlement gave me full title to the Phoenix house, which I had paid for, and released me from all liability on the fraudulent accounts, which Daniel and his partners were now separately responsible for. I did not ask for alimony. I did not want anything from him except distance and documentation. Courtney called me twice after the arrest. The first call I did not answer. The second call I answered because Rachel was with me, and I wanted a witness. Courtney's voice had changed by then. The brightness was gone. She asked me why I had done this to the family, as though I had initiated a sequence of events rather than responded to one. I told her I had done nothing to anyone. I told her that the evidence I submitted had been a legal obligation and that I hoped everyone involved found appropriate legal representation. She started to say something about how I had always been cold, always been calculating, always been the kind of person who... I told her I was going to end the call now, and that I wished her well. Then I ended the call. Margaret I heard about through the divorce attorney's office. The country club where she had been a member for 6 years rescinded her membership after Daniel's arrest became public. Several of her close friends, the women she had lunched with weekly and paraded her son's success in front of, stopped returning her calls. She had co-signed one of Daniel's business loans and was now personally exposed for a portion of it. She retained an attorney and spent the following months navigating her own reduced circumstances. I did not feel sorry for her. I had tried, experimentally, to locate something like pity when I thought about Margaret, and I found nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just the clean, complete absence of any feeling that required her to exist in my emotional world. I had spent 4 years trying to earn the approval of a woman who had decided before she met me that I was a threat. I was done allocating energy in that direction. Daniel's trial took 14 months. I testified once, briefly, calmly, and accurately. He was convicted on 3 counts of financial fraud and 1 count of identity misuse. He received a 7-year sentence. I watched the verdict read in a courtroom in downtown Phoenix in a dark green dress I had bought specifically for that day, and I felt the particular quiet that follows the resolution of something long unresolved. By then, I was building something. The house I had purchased downtown was a former community center. 2 stories, brick facade, good bones, in a neighborhood that had been slowly recovering for a decade. I had bought it at auction with cash and commissioned a full renovation with 2 specific purposes in mind. The ground floor became a professional resource center, offering free legal consultations, financial literacy workshops, and career development programming for women navigating divorce or domestic displacement. The second floor became a flexible co-working space with subsidized memberships for women-owned small businesses in their first 2 years. I named it the Callaway Center, after my great-uncle Victor, a man I never knew, who apparently had no children of his own and had chosen to leave everything to the only person in the family he had heard, through decades of distance, was still fighting. I sometimes wondered what he knew about fighting. The opening was on a Saturday in March. Rachel was there, standing in the front row with Theodore and his wife, looking genuinely pleased in the way that people look when a long, difficult thing has finished well. Several journalists came, and a local city council member gave a brief address. 43 women had pre-registered for the center's first programming cohort. I stood at the door and shook every hand and said every name out loud as they walked in. Somewhere during the reception, someone told me that Courtney had been seen recently working a front desk job at a medical office across town, that the social media presence she had spent years curating had gone quiet around the time of the trial, and that Margaret was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Glendale and had reportedly been refused entry to 2 separate charity events where she no longer had the membership standing to attend. I listened to this information and I did not say anything in response. I nodded once, and then I turned back toward the room full of women and I let it go. I had not replied to any of the 91 calls, not a single one. I had not sent a letter or a message or a response of any kind to any member of that family after I closed my door on Courtney that Thursday afternoon. Some people asked me if I regretted it. Some asked me if I thought about reaching out, about finding some version of closure that involved a conversation. I always told them the same thing. Closure is not a conversation. Closure is the decision to stop waiting for an apology that will never come from a person who still does not understand what they did. Daniel sent a letter from prison 8 months after sentencing. I received it at the Callaway Center, forwarded through Rachel's office. It was 2 pages handwritten, the handwriting I had once found beautiful, full of the kind of language people use when they have had a lot of time alone and no audience except a blank page. He said he was sorry. He said he had not understood how much I had carried. He said he hoped I was well. I read it once. I folded it carefully. I put it through the shredder at the front desk. There are women who come to the Callaway Center every week who remind me of the version of myself I was 4 years ago. Organized, capable, quietly exhausted, working twice as hard as anyone around them and receiving half the recognition, while the people they love most use their stability as a foundation for choices they'd never be asked to account for. I recognize them immediately. I recognize the particular way they set down their bags, the way they sit slightly forward in their chairs, as though they are permanently prepared to be asked to do one more thing. I recognize the way they apologize before they speak. I always tell them the same thing I had to learn for myself, not in a single dramatic night but over years of slow, difficult accumulation. The people who benefited most from your silence were not protecting you by keeping you quiet. They were protecting themselves. And the moment you stop arranging your life around their comfort is the moment you find out exactly how much of your strength was yours all along. I was 29 the night I sat in a rain-soaked car in front of a house I had paid for, with my belongings in trash bags on a lawn I had maintained, and told myself the story that had been fed to me for 4 years. That I was difficult. That I was too independent. That the reason things were hard was something intrinsic to me, something that needed managing. I believed it partially. The way you believe partially in a story you have heard so many times, it starts to feel like memory. What that night gave me, without intending to, was the end of the story and the beginning of a real one. Not a story about what was done to me, but about what I built after. I am 31 now. I sleep without a monitor on my phone. I have a home I chose, in a neighborhood I chose, with colors on the walls I picked without asking anyone's permission. I have a best friend who is also my attorney and who bills me at a significant discount and drinks very good wine. I have a center with 43 women in its first cohort, and a waiting list of 60 more. I have a great uncle I never met, who somehow, across decades of family silence and distance, saw enough to leave me the foundation for everything I was already trying to build. I think about him sometimes when I stand in the doorway of the Callaway Center and watch the lights on inside. I think about the people who tried to reduce me to a liability and a resource, who saw in my capability only a tool they could use, who assumed that throwing me out was the same as making me disappear. I think about 91 calls I never answered. I think about how free I am. If you have ever been the person everyone leaned on until you were no longer useful, the person who stayed longer than you should have because leaving felt like failure, I want you to know something. The leaving is not the failure. The leaving is sometimes the most precise, most powerful, most self-respecting thing you will ever do. And the people who told you otherwise were the ones who needed you to believe that. You do not owe your peace to the people who spent years disturbing it. You do not owe your future to the people who tried to mortgage it. Build anyway. Keep the records. Find your Rachel. And do not answer the 91 calls. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below and share what you have had to walk away from to walk toward yourself. Like and subscribe to join our community at Restoration Stories, where every week we bring you new stories about reclaiming your power, your peace, and the life that was always meant to be yours. We will see you next time. And remember, the door they closed on you was never the last door.